Ruth says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." In a world filled with refugees and people seeking refuge, in a world where identity matters in so many different ways for so many different people, it's remarkably rare to see that kind of loyalty that Ruth offers to Naomi, that accompaniment, that being with, that sense of being willing to journey from all that she has ever known and out of grief and pain and tragedy back to her mother-in-law's new land, new culture, new context, or new at least for Ruth. And there is a cost to that being with. And many amazing, I was going to say consequences, but that consequence is often a negative word, but many amazing repercussions, perhaps. I'll come back to Ruth at the end of the day. But for now, I'm going to read some words from Luke's Gospel. And apologies that we have just ended the Easter season, but I'm going to take you back there a little bit. Now on that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that has taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they didn't see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. A few reflections on the road to Emmaus, learned, perhaps magpied, from wiser people than myself, but such is often the way of things. If you look at the second half of Luke's Gospel and the first half of the Acts of the Apostles, almost all of the action, the activity, the focus is in Jerusalem. I wonder if in heading to Emmaus, some way outside Jerusalem, Cleopas and his friend were actually heading in the wrong direction, were running away. If they were, it was entirely understandable. Jerusalem must have been at fever pitch, still full for the Passover, and still a place of enormous fear where any follower of Jesus could quite reasonably have feared enduring the same fate of crucifixion that Jesus had. Were they running away? Were they walking in the wrong direction? And how often have we followed in those footsteps? How often have we headed in the wrong direction? Running, walking, crawling, stumbling. I can also imagine, slightly irreverently, perhaps, that on the day of resurrection, Jesus might have had quite a lot to do. And even for a God beyond time, a kind of road to Damascus sound and light show might have been tempting. There, half an hour and it's done. But instead, Jesus chooses to walk with Cleopas and his friend in the wrong direction for perhaps 2-3 hours, depending on how fast they were walking. And going back to Ruth, like Ruth, Jesus journeys with Cleopas and his friend. And reflecting on times when I can now recognise, in a way I could at the time as well, recognise that I was going in the wrong direction. it is for me an enormous comfort to know that Jesus doesn't abandon us at such times. And as chaplains, that Jesus calls us to walk with people, be with people, even when things are, we're fairly sure, going to get darker and harder and more painful for them. We're not called to the sunlit uplands, or not just to there. We're called to journey with people in the wrong direction as they take that journey and know that Jesus is there with us. There are some amazing open questions that Jesus offers. What's been happening? He gives a chance to share the story. And if, as I believe he does, he asks the same question of us today, tell me what's been happening. How do we respond? There is a moment of challenge. Jesus says, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. If, having shared our story with Jesus, we hear him saying, really? Seriously? Get a life? What might the focus of that challenge be? And how do we respond to it? And then there is the time when Jesus goes into the house with Cleopas and his friend. And he goes in as a guest, not as the host. Being the guest, even being the honoured guest, is a place of more vulnerability. You don't set the terms. You don't decide the menu. You don't decide where you'll sit, usually. But Jesus is willing to embrace that vulnerability in order to be with people. How do we respond to that vulnerability in Christ, the Son of God? And finally, out of the journeying, even in the wrong direction, out of the storytelling, out of the challenge, and out of the vulnerability, there is a moment of revelation where they recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread. What is our moment of revelation, or our moments of revelation? How on this day, in this time, in this place, can we listen? What will we hear? And what will be the impact on our lives? For Cleopas and his friend, it sent them back to Jerusalem with news of the risen Jesus. We don't hear of them again, ever. But we do hear of the growth of the church, growing and growing and growing. So where are we on our journey? What is our story? What is our challenge? What are we hearing? What is the revelation? And what difference does it make? And remember that through all of this, Jesus walks with us. We keep silence.